Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Move Daily Talks podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Steen, and today I'm welcoming Dr. Jessi Gold. She's a psychiatrist, a writer, and one of the loudest voices calling out how we've normalized stress, burnout, and emotional silence. She's the author of How Do You Feel? One Doctor's Search for Humanity in Medicine, a memoir and cultural critique that pulls back the curtain on what it costs to be the helper. Are you the helper in your field of work, in your family, in your social circles? Does that portray who you are? And if it does, and I think it does for a lot of women, this is going to be a very relevant podcast. We're going to be talking about a lot of emotions and feelings today. And what do we really mean when we say we're fine? I'm excited to dive into it. Let's welcome Dr. Gold to the podcast. So happy to have you on the podcast. I know we tried a few weeks ago, but yes, sometimes there's technical difficulties, which I was just saying to you can really heighten the stress. And of course, we're going to dive into that conversation about what causes stress, how we can work with our own stressors. But I want to start by asking you, what exactly are you on a mission to do? You are on social media, so there must be a mission in that social media field. I'd love to hear what that is.
Sure. First, I'll say that there's this thing with Wi-Fi where we blame ourselves and like constantly apologize. It's like, I'm so sorry that the tech thing I have zero control over keeps going out, and I'm a terrible person and I can't believe. And so I'll just say like, it brings out a lot of stress in people, like, to do and function and think it's like a sort of representative of them in some way, but it's like so out of our control. So I'm happy to be here again, was happy to reschedule, and also realize that that's a really hard thing for folks. I think when I think about me on social, a lot of people don't have access to psychiatrists. And the people that do, like, it's a small percentage of people who actually see psychiatrists, and then sometimes the ones that do don't like those either. And so I think that I went on social in part as a way to like share my writing and some things that I was doing for education purposes to have more people have access to it. And then also because I think by being sort of a human and a psychiatrist online, it gives people a different exposure to what our field can look like. So if you are able to go to one and you didn't like that person or didn't connect, you might be able to say like, oh, hey, like there are other ones. I think a secondary sort of goal being just like to destigmatize mental health and normalize the conversation as much as possible. I think I initially was like, how do you give people access to good information that they don't have, but also then know that it's normal to have these conversations and that we all should be having these conversations, and it's not scary or something that we should be like only having with one person in a cornered room alone. I think it's really important that we feel comfortable talking about this stuff just like we would anything else.
And that really comes across with you is that level of comfort. I think sometimes the concept that we have of a psychiatrist is from movies, right? And so it's not that person that can relate to us. It's someone in a white coat that's very serious, and everything is very serious. And so sometimes that's scary to go into something so serious. But
yeah, either serious or like the therapists on TV like sleep with all their patients, right? So like your boundaries are like, it's terrible, it's scary, right? Like either they're so serious they're not going to understand me, or there's going to be some like weird boundary breaking inappropriate thing that happens in like a horror film or whatever, right? Like there's nothing good where we're like mentioned, or even therapists would have the same conversation with you where it's sort of like they're getting better representation in press and things, but for the most part it's like serious or just completely boundary breaking, and so you don't feel safe, and that's not good either.
yeah. In your book, which you sent me, thank you. It's great. I haven't read all of it yet, but I am halfway through it. But yes, your relatability really comes across. And one thing that I noted that you said was, and we'll kind of go right down deep under the water line here right now, is you said, I'm worried I might not be good enough to help someone. I'm afraid I won't live up to someone's expectations. Why do so many of us, especially those of us who are helpers, feel inadequate despite clear evidence of competence. Like we know and have seen that we are competent, and yet, you uttered this yourself as a psychiatrist with your patients and just questioning sometimes, why do we feel so inadequate?
Yeah, I mean, part of it I think is the people that get attracted to these fields and sort of our core personalities of being a bit overachieving and perfectionist. So even to like the average person, maybe we are great, but to us there is no barrier for what we could be or should be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, like to quote Miley Cyrus, like we don't really appreciate the climb, but most of us are just really constantly climbing and not thinking about the ways to get there. And so I think as a person who's like that, you are going to feel inadequate because you're going to never be perfect or never be at whatever space of like complete knowledge that you can be. I think we, when you're a person like me who is a helper, like I just want to be able to help. And if I can't, like that is a fear in that, like this person came and they thought they were going to get an answer from me and thought they were going to find a partner and a support from me. And I just am not that person, or I can't fix it, or I can't help, or I don't feel qualified to help because I haven't seen enough of this, or whatever that is. And I think some people in healthcare would go the route of being like, I know everything and you know nothing. And I'm just going to put up this defense to act like somehow we do know everything and you just don't. And I think people interacting with the healthcare system often feel like, especially doctors, don't say I don't know, or don't talk to you about those insecurities or parts where we don't have the answers because we don't feel comfortable with that. Like if you come to us, we should know, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's true really, right? Especially in mental health where like there's a lot of it that's not discovered yet or people haven't figured out yet. And I think it's really important to talk about the limitations of the medication, the limitations of anything that you're doing, but also like of you, right? Like sometimes when I don't know, I feel like it's scary to say that, but that patients appreciate a lot more when I'm like, like I haven't seen a lot of people experience that. I can help figure it out. I can read, I can understand the literature, I can ask friends, or you could see someone else. And either of those things are fine with me. But I don't want to pretend that I'm going to like fix this and know everything about it because that's not helpful either. And so I think as I've gotten older and more comfortable with the in between and like the unknown and also how patients respond to the unknown, I think it's been easier for me. But when you're in training too, you don't want to be like, I know nothing. Like, you want to be like, I'm here to help, but you also don't know enough to feel confident in that because you haven't seen enough or done enough.
Yeah, that's a funny place to be in because you're constantly going between feelings of feeling competent and like you are good at your job, and then also questioning, you talked about perfectionism. So let's dive into that a bit because that's interesting character trait. I feel like I have that for myself as well. Where does that come from in us? Like how does that develop? And then how can we work with it so that she's not so loud sometimes?
She can be so loud.
Oh, so
I
loud.
think some of it is probably like you're born with it. And then some of it, just like anything, is like where you're raised and what's around you and what's if you're in a household where the expectations are such that clearly that you can't make mistakes or you're punished for mistakes or something, you would learn really quickly not to make them.
Yeah.
um, if you're like me, I was the fourth. All of my siblings were really like successful, and nobody told me that the answer to my problems was to not ever mess up and only get A's. But I saw their careers and I said, like, oh, I have to do that. Like, that's baseline. Like,
Yes.
baseline
Yeah.
is you go to an Ivy League school, and that's the baseline. And so
Sure.
if that's like what you see and kind of like swim in and observe, it doesn't even have to be explicit. Sometimes I think we just kind of internalize that in a way. Like my parents would probably say that I was worse on me than they would have ever been on me. Like, and they were confused by that sometimes. Like, why is she doing that? Like, we didn't tell her she couldn't get an A minus, but like, okay, if you really want to tutor when you have an A minus, we'll get you one, but I don't know that that's what we should be doing. And,
Right.
I think there's ways to support that and kind of help but I think some of it's just like observing and learning, and some of it's our brain as it is. I think, I write about this some in the book, but there's like an adaptive form and a maladaptive form. And the adaptive form is the one that you want, which is that, like, it's helping you with goals, it's helping you achieve, but you also know that you're human and you will eventually make a mistake or fail, and it's not the end of the world when that happens. But the maladaptive one is like, when that does happen, it's like, how could that have happened? I don't make mistakes. Like, it's terrible. And we see that in a lot of healthcare workers, and it's often associated with like depression and honestly suicidal thoughts, and honestly like burnout, because it's just like this expectation that's unrealistic, but it's also bound to happen. And when it does happen, it's almost like a shock when it does. Like, but I don't do that. Like, how could that happen? I don't do that. And I think it's something that, as I've gotten older and been more able to just like treat myself nicer, a lot of what, you said, how to quiet her, a
Mhm.
lot of it is a bit of self-compassion, right? Like,
Yeah, for sure.
it's a bit of like, dude, like, you're human, like, you're going to make a mistake, or it doesn't mean you're a bad person, or it doesn't mean all of this stuff that sort of kind of goes at your core value about, right? Like, if you heard the words you use to describe yourself, you would never be friends with yourself. And so, as much as possible, being able to say, like, wait, like, that's not how I should be talking to myself. Like, how do I reframe that in a way that would talk to a friend? Like, if
Mhm.
a friend made a mistake, you wouldn't be like, that's because you're an idiot and don't deserve to be in this job. I mean, I hope, right? But if like, if you would do that immediately for yourself. You'd be like, I made a mistake. I'm dumb. Everyone's gonna fire me. How did I get here? I don't deserve to be here. I should leave, right? And so if you're kind of able to go like, sometimes you make mistakes as you're human, or how do you learn from this, or to look at a sort of like Carol Dweck sort of growth mindset of things, which I think is helpful for folks too. Not everybody, but some folks. Like, being able to address it that way is going to be the first step to like dealing with the fact that you might still have those tendencies where you don't want to make mistakes, but being able to be more compassionate will let you go a bit from the maladaptive side to the adaptive side, because you're able to say, like, sometimes I can't do this, and that's okay. Now what,
Yeah, I like that you highlighted that there's, she has a good role in your life as well. Like she can bring some good parts, but when it's maladaptive, it's yeah, not so good. One of the things that I learned, I don't know how many years ago, but I said this to my children as they were growing up all the time, is that the rules of the universe aren't different for you. And yet you create this rule that you're never allowed to do this or you always have to do that, making the rules different for you than every other human. So I found that helpful. But what I like about what you said there too is I think understanding what the driver is for me has been really helpful. So
Mm,
for myself, understanding that I will forsake authenticity for the sake of attachment. I learned
mm,
that from Gabor Mate, but that is something that if I'm not that, if I want attachment more, that's when perfectionism just rises up, and I have to be perfect. I have to put everything out online perfectly. I have to look perfect. I have to
mm,
say the perfect things, because if I don't, then I might lose attachment with people that are important to me, and
mm.
sometimes people who aren't important to me. So
Like,
that
there's
has,
value in it. like
yeah,
like there's an inherent sort of value in your perfectionism, or this image of you. Is that kind of what you mean?
yeah, and just that if I stay perfect, then people will like me more. I will stay
Mm,
attached. I'll keep the attachment. And so I forsake being authentic or real, like right. But knowing that, I can see when I'm doing that,
hmm
which is very helpful for me because I can go again, rules of the universe aren't different for you. You're allowed to mess up things. You're allowed to say the wrong thing. You're allowed to not look perfect. You're allowed to have messy hair. You're allowed to
yeah.
everything else. But yeah.
Yeah, I think people don't realize how simple things can help in big ways. And what I mean by that is, like, simply naming that is
Yeah.
like life changing.
Yeah.
In like, why? But it's true. Like, simply being able to go, like, there I go doing that again,
Yeah.
is like really, really helpful. And it sounds like, when sometimes when I say it to people, like, in a talk or like a one-on-one with a patient or something, they're going to be like, that's the dumbest thing you've ever said, Dr. Gold. Like, I've struggled with this my whole life, and all I have to do is like, there I go doing it again. And it's not that that's all you have to do, but that first step, like, sounds silly, but it makes a big difference. Like, being able to go, like, the rules aren't different from you. Like, it's just a way of kind of labeling that thought and saying, like, I'm doing that again. And what does that mean? Why is it triggered? What's going on that makes me think that way is like the second level. But the first is just to go like, hey, you did it again. Like, it's okay. Like, now what? Right. And I think that people really discount like how something that simple might be like actually life changing.
That identifying is so important. And you talk about that a lot in your book about identifying emotions and feelings. I love how you had so much internal conversation with yourself and you let us see what was going on in your own brain in the book. And I thought that was really helpful. What do you hope readers take away from that story?
Sometime in the middle of the pandemic, my personal therapist, who you see a lot in the book too, said to me, like, had you ever asked yourself how you're doing? Have you ever asked yourself how you're doing? And I laughed. And again, stupid things that are helpful was like, why would I do that? Like, I spend all day asking other people, why does it matter how I feel? Why does it, like, of course I know how I feel. But the truth is, like, I actually didn't. Like, I was so out of my body in doing my job that I just was going through the motions and trying not to let other people's really hard stories, I see healthcare workers, it's hard, like, affect me. And so I wasn't paying attention to how it was impacting me until it was like too late to notice that, where my options of what I could do something for myself were much more limited, right? And nobody's going to notice a subtle change in you except for you. And so
Yeah.
being able to do that is going to help in tremendous ways. And I think one, like, people noticing that, like, all of us do that. If I don't do that and I'm like the feelings person who went to like extra school about feelings, there's no way the rest of us are doing that, right? And so I think giving ourselves grace to realize that we just really didn't learn how to talk or deal with emotions for the most part, for most of us, in culture, in school, in gender, all of these things like that make it more complicated. And so just like realizing it's a skill you can learn and that it's okay to need to do it later is part of it. Recognizing that, your healthcare workers are also human. I think in giving you my internal monologue is sort of showing you that, but I also see healthcare workers as patients, and they're the patients in the books. And so sort of seeing like how that might show up in your healthcare, but also maybe give them a little grace too. I think that in showing that, like, we all struggle with emotions, it also helps in like our interactions with friends and family, our interactions with our children, our interactions with anybody we're sort of caregiving for. I think, we all put these cultural things on emotions that make it really complicated. Behind me I keep this like inside out thing, but it's just because it's like such a good
Yeah.
description of feelings, which is like, we don't have good feelings and bad feelings, we just have feelings, and like, that's okay, and we shouldn't blame ourselves for them or try to make them go away right away. Like, we should just be like, hey, I'm angry, like, the
Yeah.
end, and kind of go from there. And I think I've always been like either not labeling them, not noticing them, or really quick to make them go away because people didn't like big feelings in me, or they interacted with like patients in a way I didn't like, or they were showing up and messing up my work day. Or, speaking of perfectionism, there's this sort of like opinion that emotions run counter to that, because if I let my emotions out or I told you the real answer to how I was feeling, I'm not going to get anything done, or I'm going to make a mistake because the emotions are going to take over. And I think getting to a place where that's not true, and like, you can feel and do well at your job, like,
Mhm.
you can be a psychiatrist who helps other people's feelings and be affected by it, and that's okay too. And I think that balance has been something that is still work for me, like, as a person who goes to therapy every week, but is important work, I think. and
Mhm.
and I wanted to model that, just because, not because my story is like unique or something, but almost like because it's not, because I think so many of us struggle with this. We just don't name it or realize it or recognize it. And I think it's important that we do.
And you saying that, it honestly makes me feel more drawn to you. So I'm sure that that's what comes across with your patients as well.
That's kind. Thank you.
Mhm.
I think, psychiatry doesn't want you to talk about yourself very much. I think for a field in medicine, so medicine itself doesn't like you talking about yourself, but then like psychiatry has this other thing, thanks to people like Freud, where we're supposed to not like say anything about ourselves. Like I was taught no photos in your office, no talking about yourself. But I actually have learned over time that like self-disclosure has an importance in a session, and like has
Mm.
a as a power, as a skill in both getting people to connect with you, but also just like breaking down some sort of like barriers in some of these conversations, because you've experienced it too. Like not in a way where I'm like, hey, want to hear all about me all of the time,
My
because
turn.
that's not helpful either, right? Like
No.
I've heard of that in people going to therapists where it feels more about them, and that's not what I would intend to do. But I think there's like intentional self-disclosure, intentional like humanity that makes people feel more connected, because what you're expecting people to do is like tell you things they've told no one before and be okay with that. Like, I don't know why you would want to do that to someone you know nothing about. I
Yeah.
just, or like, very little, because all they do is say nothing. Like, it's just not my style. And it's hard to be different in that sense in this field where it's not really what we're supposed to do. But I appreciate you saying that, because to me, I think it's important.
Yeah, I think so too. We're living in an evolving stress landscape. Your book was written primarily around the pandemic time, but fast forward 5 years, and we've got a new stress landscape that's around us, and I feel it with AI rising up. What is going on, and what are you hearing now within your office? What are people coming in with in terms of stressors?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've just been in like basically a constant state of uncertainty since at least 2020. A lot of these things were underlying issues pre 2020, and 2020 had a lot of things that made it worse, right? So, in healthcare workers, or, I see college kids and work on campuses too, like their mental health wasn't good. And then COVID came and it was bad. It was like not good. And then COVID had these different stressors and just mass kind of uncertainty and shared trauma, and then made it more complicated as we've gone forward. I don't think any of us have really gotten a break,
Yeah.
right? Like, I
No.
think that, people will be like, oh, well, the pandemic's over. Aren't we better? And I think like they neglect, when you have that kind of outlook, to say that like there was a compounding effect, first of all, of the pandemic to begin with, that trauma has no timeline also, but also that like we've somehow had a break, like there's somehow a time where everything was good and we could reset. Like I don't think we've had that.
No.
I think we've just been in kind of like, if it's not one thing, it's another. And that
Yeah.
doesn't even include like people's personal lives, which are still,
Right.
they're still human, and there's
Right.
always things. And so I think just being mindful that like when you don't have a break, it's sort of like you're on fight or flight all the time. And when you're like that all the time, you're going to be tired. You're going to be just sort of like having trouble concentrating. You're going to be really having trouble reset and like finding joy, and like being able to understand what you can control and can't, because everything feels out of control.
Yeah.
I think we have to be able to have barriers around consumption of information that is negative, like the news or social media. And I think it's very hard for people, because people feel like they're ill informed as a result. Like if you turn it off, you're not a caring person. But I think in turning it off, it's still there when you turn it back on, and you're not any less of a caring person. You just cared a little more about yourself for a second.
Yeah.
And, I've had to do that with myself in a lot of different times, when I kind of feel myself being like a doom scroller, or like overly into the stuff that I'm seeing on social or commenting or whatever, because it's not positive. And most of the news is like all around the country, whatever, or the world. It's no matter how you feel about whatever and where your politics are, it doesn't matter. Like there's just a lot, right? It doesn't, none of that matters. Like I think anybody paying attention to any side of anything would be affected. And I think that that's important to recognize and name, but also say like, I'm in a job where the world affects the people who show up in my office all the time. And sometimes it's helpful for me to know what's going on in the world, because my patients are going to show up and tell me. But I don't need to do that all the time. Like I also am going to hear it. 17 times a day. So I don't need to then also go read it 17 more times. And so like giving ourselves like the grace and limitations around the things like that where we're able to make it stop a little is important because like could we stop the pandemic? I mean, it was there, but could we stop reading about it all the time? Probably, right? So trying to find these like little areas where you can take ownership of boundaries or little moments of control in a world that feels uncertain and out of control is really important.
Yeah, remember when the TV would come on and they would just like they'd be giving you the data for the day, like the stats, how many people got it in what states and countries, and that was crazy scary. Like we're all like glued to the television. Like I'm sure stress was at an astronomical
Yeah, I
level.
mean, we got emails in our hospital inbox of like, how many patients are in the hospital, how many patients
Oh,
are on this unit or whatever. Like
yeah.
that's not fun.
No, no. You mentioned a few ways to take a break, so I appreciate that because I think that is really crucial, and we do have to do that self-monitoring to see where we're at. And you said check in with yourself, like how do you feel? How is this information making you feel? What's the outpouring of that? What does that look like, and how you're interacting with others, or where you're going internally with your own, internal voice. So I think that was really good. Let's talk about stress a little bit more here
Mhm.
too, and I want to also talk about burnout. um, we as aging people, and especially women in menopause, that's me, and that's the majority of the audience, we don't want inflammation, right? That leads to so many bad things in our life, including multiple diseases, and we just want to avoid it at all costs. But stress can be very inflammatory because it can release more cortisol constantly dripping into our lives and our bloodstream. So let's talk about stress. How do we work with the stressors that we have? Because for a lot of us, if we're even in healthcare, we're helping people who are chronically ill or palliative or sick children, like stress is going to be high, right? And lots of us have jobs with very high stressors. So you can't get rid of it, but how do you engage with it differently?
Yeah. Um, you know, it's important, like, stress versus anxiety is one conversation, stress versus burnout's another, but stress is always like there's a component of stress that's helpful, right? Like my patients are always like, don't take that away. Like I won't do anything, right? So there is a component of stress because it's often caused by something external that is motivating, that is helping us do stuff. That is fine if like when that thing goes away, we calm down and take care of ourselves and we're not constantly still on alert, right? Like that's where the sort of like hormones being affected and other sort of like neurotransmitters being kind of permanently activated is kind of
Right.
coming from is like we don't come down from the thing that caused it in the first place and then it becomes more like anxiety, which is like an internal state that's triggering it and not the external one, right? And so I think what's important for folks to realize is that like it's not that you don't need like you're gonna have stress, like you're gonna have it, in fact you might like it sometimes, but
Yeah.
it's more of like a thing to be like, I have this stressful thing coming up. How am I going to take care of myself after? How am I going to get myself through that? How am I going to make sure it's not taking over, right? I think one of the things that's really helped me is I used to think like I'd like beat myself up if I was affected by things. Like I'd be like, how did that really busy week make me feel bad? Well, it was a really busy week. It's going to make you feel bad. That's not your fault, but it could have been prepared for differently. It could have been coped with in the moment differently. And you could have treated myself a lot nicer afterwards, right? And so I think that we can't predict all elements of stress for sure, right? But I think when there's something coming, like a busy week or an event or like, a thing you're planning for or your kid has surgery or whatever, like that is going to stress you out. Like, point
Yeah.
but it should, you're a human, but it's more like how do you plan to take care of yourself during it? How are you going to make sure you come down after it? How are you going to regulate your body during it too, right? So like I have like about every sort of like just literally like on my desk I have like I could grab it right now like
He's
every
holding a
sort of
squeezy
stress
ball.
balls,
Yeah.
tons of them all over the place, super simple,
Huh.
right? You can do the same with scents. You can do the same with like a fidget spinner if that's more of your sort of game. I also have like stress buddy. I literally everything. But because it's like sometimes when I'm in meetings, like I can feel myself getting activated in my body by
Yeah.
paying attention to my body, and I need to ground myself. And the only way to do that and not be in my head and in my body and in causing that fight or flight response is to like touch something
Mhm.
that's in the moment, right? Like, because there are mind ways to do it where you like, start naming categories of things you like and you kind of distract yourself from the thing. There's lots of that, which you could look up, and that's other grounding techniques. But some of the physical stuff or the smell and sort of scent stuff, when you're in a meeting and no one can see your hands, like I'm in Zoom all day. Like
Yeah.
nobody can tell that, like you can't tell that I'm playing around with this under here.
Yeah.
I'm just talking to you. And so it helps me be able to be like, this is stressful, but I'm not going to spin out because I'm like paying
Mhm.
attention to my body in space, and I'm paying attention to what it's doing to me, and I'm regulating it to some capacity. And I think that part's important too. Like learning some skills for in the moment regulate, like could be deep breathing, like the things they teach you at yoga. Exhale longer than you inhale. That's it, right? Like that's the reason that helps, is it's actually regulating your body and calming your body down, and that can help too. And nobody can tell you do that. And I think a lot of my patients worry like, oh no, like if I get stressed and you can see my stress, like then I have to do something that everyone can see me try to calm myself down for. It's not really all like me. If I exhale longer than I inhale, you can't tell I did that,
No.
like unless you're being really creepy and counting. But I hope you're not, like, and so I think there's lots of stuff we can do to take care of ourselves
Mhm.
before, in the moment, and after, that can make stress be a thing but not the only thing or the thing that lasts forever.
Yeah. Great tips right there. So just anticipating, and then coming closely after the anticipation with compassion for self. You're human. This is going to be stressful. And then implementing some of these techniques. I think that's a great idea. Now, I did talk to you about this. I'm like, oh, I wish that I had interviewed you a month ago when Natalie Dawson was on the Diary of a CEO, and she had said something which I'm sure many of you heard, but she said, because it kind of went viral, she said, "You're not a candle. You cannot burn out." And then a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists chimed in and did a duet to that statement, basically saying, well, that's not quite true. I don't know if you heard it, but let's
Oh
talk
yeah.
about burnout, because I know a lot of us probably feel like we are at the end of our rope, and that feels like burnout. What is burnout? How can we recognize it? And then what can we do about it?
Yeah, I think when people willy-nilly use it like you're a candle, like I think that like people come to assume that it just means like work was hard and it affected you. Like that's what nobody means. That's not what we mean. It's like a lot of mental health, especially sort of mental health terminology, is used like that. Like I'm depressed, but you don't mean you have depression. I'm anxious, but
Right.
you don't mean you have anxiety.
Right.
Like it gets kind of usurped in that way, which makes people minimize it, which is complicated. But burnout, as defined by the people who study it and have for a long time, is a workplace associated condition, meaning it's caused by the systems that we work in. Meaning, when you're away from the system, well, your workplace could be home, right? Like it depends on if you're a mother and that's your job, that's where your system is. If you're in school, that's your system. If you're in a workplace that's causing it, that's your workplace, right? So it's a workplace associated condition. It's not in a diagnostic manual for psychiatric illness as a result, but the World Health Organization, everyone else has it in occupational phenomenon because
Okay.
it's secondary to systems. And then it's a constellation of three things. The first one is emotional exhaustion. So, like at the end of the day, just feeling like spent, used up, not much left. A lot of people sort of say that like they are going in, going in, going in, and they come home and they're just like whew. And like for me, I would fall asleep every day after work and have no idea why I was so tired, and then I'd wake up and my whole night's sleep was a mess, and I was like,
Yeah.
hey, what's going on? But it was like heavy sleep, like almost like what physically having COVID felt like. But that's more like physical exhaustion, but it was emotional exhaustion manifesting as physical exhaustion for me.
Mhm.
The second one depends on who you ask, but is either cynicism or depersonalization. Cynicism is like anger. I mean, that's the best way to describe it. Sort of like feeling more snippy at colleagues, friends, email, life, like more negative, more like outwardly angry. And then depersonalization is more like outwardly numb. right? So, I think it can be hard in healthcare because we actually depersonalize to not feel the things that our patients are telling us, and it can get confusing. But it's like removing yourself to have less empathy. And that means in every space, like with your colleagues, with your family, and with work, but you're just like way less connected and interacting differently. And then the last one is a reduced sense of personal accomplishment. So we talked about like feeling ineffective, or like if you're a perfectionist not getting everything done, like that can feel very bad. It's like you're doing less, someone said you're doing less, or you just feel like you're doing less. And that's the one that people show up in my office for, because for me, like that's the one where people go, hey, work is getting affected, or someone else told me, or I'm worried I'm going to get punished for this. The other ones I think are pretty subtle in the context of most workplaces. And so it can be pretty hard for people to notice, but it can really affect people. And when we talk about it, we're not just talking about it to talk about it. I mean, tons of evidence that burnout's like a stepping stone to all sorts of other mental health conditions, substance use, sleep disorders, depression, suicidal thoughts. Like it's not like we're just saying it to say it. And then if you're in a caregiving profession or any other thing, like if you're burnt out, you affect the people that you're interacting with in your job, right? Like you make errors, you like, and your errors could hurt someone. And so I think that when we sort of minimize it, especially for everybody, but you just sort of like psh, like you're not a candle. Well, like you can be affected by the systems you work in. It can be a significant impact on your life. It can then alter other people's lives because you're either that person's colleague or that person's patient or that whatever it is. Like it has a big systems impact.
Right.
And then like the most obvious systems impact is people quit. Like they sit in their job
Yeah.
ineffective for a while. Everyone's picking up their slack, so it's contagious, right? You have an angry coworker doing less, you're going to be angry and doing more for them, and then they
Yeah.
leave, and then that's hard too. So it has these like tremendous impacts on
There's
a
a ripple.
workplace because you're there as the person picking up the slack of the angry person, and then they leave, and then you're picking up their whole job, right? And then we have to rehire, and it costs a lot of money. So it's a really expensive thing to a system. It's a really expensive thing to a sort of like the people in the system, and then to the individual too. And so I think when things like that are said like that, it makes me frustrated because I think people will minimize their experience and not identify or notice it because they don't think it has value, and they don't think it's real or important, right? Like if the only way that you can miss work is if you're hemorrhaging, like burnout, depression, all these things that are like my bread and butter don't like meet that level of scrutiny because like you can't see that I'm burnt out maybe,
Yeah.
like, but you would see if I was hemorrhaging in front of you.
Right.
And so I think it just creates this like higher and higher bar for what counts and what's valid. And I have a lot of problems with that just as a person. And I really hope that people recognize it's real because it is, but also because like problems matter in this way because they do have a big impact, even if it's not this like obvious one where you're bleeding.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a good explanation. Yes. Um, I think about my own life and my stories, and those who are really close to me, I've heard their stories as well. And sometimes, I mean, I'm sure so many people can relate to this, but there are parts of our stories that we don't want, right? It's like part of the story, maybe that's embarrassing, that brings shame, that is wrought with grief, and we just don't want to feel these things. And um, yeah, it's a very hard to carry hard parts of our story. How how can we do that better with more empathy or compassion?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Like, we all need to get better at telling someone. If you
Mm,
tell one person and that person is a person you trust and you see their reaction and they don't like spontaneously combust, I think that helps us get better at being able to identify things ourselves. Because one of the hardest things, I mean, in particular about trauma, is we choose to tell a person and they're the wrong person to have told, and then
yeah.
they act like you did something wrong, and then that's a secondary trauma, right? Like you get another kind of hit as a result. I think we need to figure out who in our lives are like the right people to have these conversations with and test the waters and kind of not maybe tell the whole thing, but see what that's like. We should definitely not jump right into social media, open self disclosure of our entire trauma history.
Oh,
Like, I think,
mercy. I
you
hate it
know,
when I see that. I'm like, oh, why are you?
yeah, I mean,
Oh.
it's not like you should be comfortable with it yourself before something like that happens. You should also know that you owe nobody anything, that like your story is your story. How much you choose to tell
Mhm.
and to who is your decision, and that really matters too. I think some people need the therapy piece and like a
Yeah.
practice in private before you could practice in public or get more comfortable with parts of your story. I mean, I think I'm on like what 6 years with my therapist in January, almost weekly, and I went to one before, but she's amazing and she's one in the
Mhm.
book. And I think my self-awareness is like at a totally different level, and my ability to feel comfortable with any response that people might have to parts of me is really different as a result of that, and like really understanding why their reactions might bother me or be hard, or why I might need to talk about that. And a lot of these things go to core issues we don't want to have conversations with our friends about. And so I think part of it is when you keep it inside, you just keep judging yourself. So whatever it looks like
Mhm.
to either get it out to tell a trusted person or test the waters with a trusted person or try talking to someone who's trained, I think is like a really good step to owning your story. If you're
Mhm.
not there yet, writing, journaling is also a good step, because you can, like, no one's judging you for what's on paper, and you can kind of just write and see how you feel, and like pay attention to what that's bringing up for you, and like try to tell it that way. And it'll teach you about why those parts of your story might be harder for you to tell, or feel harder for you to tell. And I think that makes a difference too.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. Let's end with a little rapid fire question
Okay.
here. So, I mean,
I'll
I
do
don't
my
know.
best. I'm a verbose psychiatrist, as you can tell.
I don't know if the answers are going to be short
Okay,
because,
I'll try.
as we're talking about feelings and emotions here, you can't just say, let's see. Let's see where this goes. What's the most misunderstood emotion?
Anger.
Why is that?
It's my favorite too, because I think that we, like, especially women, judge ourselves for being angry. Like, we're not supposed to be angry, but that's my baseline. Like, that's the first thing I go to. That's a bigger emotion. It's anger. And so instead of just being like mad at it, I just think we don't know what to do with it. Like, it's
Mhm.
less clear. Like, sadness is a thing that we kind of understand, and anxiety, worry is this thing that we kind of understand. And then this like sort of idea of joy and happiness is a thing we understand. Anger feels confusing. Like, it
Mhm.
doesn't fit in a box. We don't understand where it's coming from. We don't know what it means. We judge ourselves for it. Women aren't supposed to be angry because it goes with that other word that starts with a B. And I think that we really try to push it down, and that probably actually makes it worse. And so, yeah, I would say anger, despite it actually being one of my favorite emotions too.
Mhm. What emotion do people pretend they don't feel but absolutely do? Could be the same answer.
Oh, like apathy?
Hmm. I pretend I
Like,
don't feel it, but I totally do feel it.
yeah, like I feel like we think that like I don't know, like some of us just don't feel things about things. And so
Mhm.
like it's not like, and I think i- it's not neutral, right? Like we don't feel neutral, we feel nothing. And I think that idea of like not feeling something about something someone else might feel a lot about is like embarrassing. And so I say that in a sense that like sometimes there's things that happen in the world and you don't have like big reactions or big feelings because like you don't know anything about it, or you don't know how to feel, or you're just not a person who like wants to feel big about everything. But if you said to someone like I feel nothing about that, someone would be like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
And so I think that that's one of those things, like that's where that's coming from for me.
What's the feeling that shows up as fatigue, but it isn't tiredness?
Anxiety.
Yeah, so tiring, isn't it? It's so tiring.
because either like it's mental
Yes.
gymnastics, just being
So
super
much.
worried or like trying to predict the next threat, or you're actually physically like trying to run from a threat permanently, right? And so like if anxiety was designed to be like, I am a human who shouldn't be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, and then your like detector gets out of whack and you think there's one everywhere or there could be one everywhere, you're just permanently on alert, right? And so if you're ready to run at all points, like you're going to be tired because you've
Ugh.
just been like hyper, and you don't sleep, right? Because if you sleep, the saber-toothed tiger will eat you. So
Yes.
all those things make tons of sense, but like if you're doing it just all the time in every situation, like you're going to feel super crummy.
Hmm. So, what emotion do we label as anxiety, but it isn't anxiety at all?
Ooh, fear.
Ah, yes. Yikes.
I
We
think
do.
so.
Yeah. We're
Fe-
afraid. And so it makes us feel something in our bodies. And so we say that's anxious. What do we
yeah.
do with fear?
I think it's okay
Feel
to be
it?
afraid sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it tells you something. I think the good thing about every emotion is it tells you something. Like if you get really good at noticing it and whatever, right? Like why am I mad at my emails? It's not just that I'm mad at my emails, it's that an email when you have no capacity is going to make you mad because you have no capacity. It's not about the email, it's about the
Yeah.
capacity. And so you
Mhm.
can learn a lot about your reactions by like paying more attention to that stuff. Like why are you afraid? Like what makes you afraid? What scenarios are making you more afraid? And like as women there's a lot of them, right? And I think that that's like what the world brings. And you know, I said to my sister recently that, have you ever been in one of those driverless Ubers like
I haven't
Waymos?
yet, but
I
yeah.
said, I said, it's kind of bad that I feel safer in a driverless car at night than with a like a random driver, right?
Yeah.
And she was like, yeah, I mean, it's just a computer driving a car around. Like, that seems like that itself would be fear inducing, but the person and the unpredictability and safety of the person was worse for me, right? And so I think just being able to kind of recognize that there are things in the world that are make you afraid and that there are things you can do to prevent them, but sometimes you can't. And like trying to, you know, balance that like fear or anxiety thing is important.
What's one feeling people try to fix instead of feeling it?
Ooh, anger too, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. I knew you were going to say
Uh,
that because that's
do
me.
you feel like that's true?
I feel like I try to fix it, and it's I did a psilocybin session, a therapeutic psilocybin session, and one of the most profound moments of it for me was blowing all of my anger out onto people that I had never expressed it to.
Hmm.
It was crazy. Like I literally 30 times blew and pushed,
Hmm.
and I was just kind of like releasing it from inside of me and
Yeah.
putting it where it was supposed to be in the first place instead of
Yeah.
internally. So I didn't want to feel it. Yeah.
It feels like a lot.
Oh, it's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some people love it though. They just, maybe they don't love it, but some people allow it.
It's an allowable emotion in some people and some professions and some genders.
Yeah. Okay. One more. What
Yep.
emotion are people most afraid to admit out loud?
What emotion are they most afraid to admit out loud? Envy or shame, probably. One of those, like, I think, like, both of those things are pervasive, but
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't know that we like to say something was shameful, like, because you're ashamed, you're not gonna
Yeah.
say it out loud. And then envy has this like, if
Yeah.
I covet something you have or am jealous of something you have, that says something about me, not just society or the thing or whatever, right? And it shouldn't. It should say more about the world than the person. And so
Mhm.
I think both of those are true. I would also, as an aside, say, like, you're not asking me this, but what emotion do I think is overrated? And I'm going to tell you happiness.
Interesting. Do
And
tell.
I just think we have this like belief that everybody functions like the goal is happiness. That
Mm-hmm.
like going to therapy, that going to a psychiatrist, that going to like life, that the goal is happiness all the time. And that's
Mm.
just not true. I think the goal is actually that you have all of the things all of the time, and that's okay. And like sometimes you feel happy, but the expectation that you can feel happy all of the time is not a thing. And like we have all these things like don't worry, be happy, or slogans and things where people like that's the goal of everything. Like who said? Like
Yeah.
I remember I said to my therapist something like, well, I don't know that I like this is like making me feel happier. And she was like, is that the point? Or are you just like, should like we be trying to get you to a place where all things are true, or that you have the you happy sometimes, sad sometimes, like there's more of a neutral thing to it, right? Like that the best emotion that you're trying to get is actually more of like an emotional neutrality than to be like ecstatic and happy all the time. And I think in the same way that we judge ourselves for anger or we don't admit shame or envy, the goal of happiness is also an unattainable use of emotions.
Yeah. Yeah, it sure is. Like I I think I've said that to my kids though at times. I just want you to be happy. But, I
But it's
mean,
not like it's not, you just mean you want them to be safe and
yeah.
comfortable and
Yeah.
okay telling you when they're not, and like able to recognize when things bring them joy, right? Like you don't necessarily
Yeah.
mean
Yeah, happy all the
that the
time. Happy, happy.
that
Yeah.
like the goal is like that the only thing that's acceptable is happiness. You just mean that you want them to feel like you
Content.
don't want, you want to take the pain away.
Yeah.
And that's okay,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good place to leave this because that's something, it's 2026, we're moving into the new year and thinking about growing thyself, that's always a top of mind for me and in our company that's a really big piece of the wellness component that we look at and understanding your emotions, your feelings, how we block those, what gets in the way, and how we can release those is exactly the work that you are doing. And so we thank you for that and for your book, How Do You Feel? That is available now anywhere that you find your books. I will link it in the show notes below too. I've thoroughly enjoying what I've read so far and will continue to read throughout 2026 as well. Thank you for being my guest. That was lovely today.
Thanks for having me.
Where can people find you on social media and or work with you? Yeah, give us your
Sure.
details.
Yeah, at Dr. Jessi Gold, Jessi spelled like Jessica without the CA, so Jessi on most platforms. I probably most regularly these days use Instagram, have a LinkedIn too because I work in higher education and that's where those people are. But website is just drjessigold.com. There's a contact page in there. I like to speak, I like to travel, I like to talk. Goals for me are like to get out of the US and to get into more professions. So if anybody's listening, that would be helpful. I'm very into like expanding my horizons with talks because it feels like another way to impact more people.
I listened to your talks at Google. You can find that on YouTube. Yeah, that's great.
Thank you.
Well, wonderful. Thank you again for being my guest. And to all of you, now go move daily in your fitness, your wellness, your nutrition, and we'll see you all in the next Move Daily Talks.